Welcome to Echo Tales, where we delve into stories that resonate deep within the human heart. Today, we journey into a tale of loss, sudden revelation, and the painful path to rediscovering truth. Part 1. The Weight of a Promise. The memory still sears itself into my mind, the exact moment I pushed away from the cold kitchen chair, my heart a drum against my ribs, threatening to burst free. On the laptop screen, the plane tickets glowed, a luminous blue beacon in the hushed kitchen, painting my face in their faint, ethereal light. A round trip to the Azure Coast, 2 passengers, myself, Alara Hayes, and my 8-year-old son, Finn. One decisive click of the mouse echoed in the silent room, not just in my ears, but deep within my soul. It was a declaration, a thunderclap of resolve. This shadowy existence, 3 years of it, was ending now. It had to. 3 years ago, my husband, Julian Vance, was declared dead in a bizarre accident during a business trip. There was no body, only a hastily written report and a death certificate handed to me with practiced, impersonal sympathy. I still remember that day like a phantom ache, a scar I can't erase. I stood in this very kitchen, clutching Finn to me as a trembling colleague uttered the words, "He's gone." I'm so sorry. The world split open, and I felt us fall through the crack, swallowed whole. From that day forward, I lived like a phantom myself, moving through life in a blur. I had once loved Julian so fiercely that I endured his endless work trips, his late-night calls that bled into early mornings, and the growing coldness in his voice. I convinced myself he was merely busy, that he would eventually change, turn back to me to us. But instead, he vanished, abruptly, and I believed then, permanently. Or so I thought. After his disappearance, I swore to live for Finn. I sold my wedding ring, its golden band now a bitter reminder, to cover a portion of our mortgage. I took on a demanding full-time position at a local bank, refusing myself the luxury of rest, of true grief. Every spare minute was a desperate attempt to fill the gaping emptiness I saw in my son's innocent eyes. Finn didn't often speak of his father, but each time he did, it felt like a blade twisting deep inside me. Today, as I purchased those tickets to the Azure Coast, I wasn't merely booking a vacation. I was buying a promise to myself to finally move forward, to rediscover the curve of a smile, to teach my son that life isn't solely defined by what you lose. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. The sound must have carried, because Finn burst in from the living room, a wide, excited grin plastered across his face the moment he heard the magic words, "We're going to the beach." He wrapped his small arms around me, holding on with a strength that belied his age, and whispered, "You're going to be happier there, right, Mom?" I didn't know how to answer. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. But one thing I knew with absolute certainty, this was the threshold of something entirely new for us. Part 2. Echoes of the Past. There was a time when my life felt lifted straight from the pages of a glossy magazine spread. Julian wasn't just handsome. He possessed that rare, effortless charm, the kind that drew people in, made them lean forward when he spoke. His quick wit could make me laugh even on the grimmest days. I met him when I was 25, a junior loan officer at the bank, still navigating the complexities of who I was. He walked in with that confident stride, looking as though he owned every room he entered, asking questions about mortgage packages with a glint in his eye, as if he already knew all the answers. By the end of that meeting, I was irrevocably smitten, and he, I knew, was well aware of it. We married a year later. At first, ours was the kind of marriage people envied. Weekend hikes through the rugged Rockies, wine-soaked nights beneath a canvas of glittering stars, spontaneous road trips simply because we could, because the world felt wide open and full of possibility. Julian had begun to carve out a name for himself in the competitive world of financial brokerage, quickly ascending to become one of the rising stars in his firm. I felt an immense pride standing beside him at office parties, his arm draped possessively over my shoulder, as if we were building something unshakable, something solid. And then Finn came along. My sweet boy, our miracle. I truly believed Julian would settle, trading the endless late-night work calls for cherished bedtime stories, choosing family dinners over client obligations. But instead, the chasm widened. He became even more consumed, pursuing investors and sealing deals in cities I'd only seen on maps, if at all. There were months when Finn barely saw his dad except in passing, Julian's hurried kiss on his forehead at 6 in the morning, and my quiet pretense of not hearing the front door click shut at midnight. I tried to talk to him about it. At first, gently, with hesitant pleas, then with desperate, tearing urgency. "Julian," I remembered saying one night, standing in this very kitchen, tears stinging my eyes, though I refused to let them fall. "You're missing his childhood. You're missing our life." He'd wrap an arm around me, kiss my hair, and promise it was just for a season, that all his long hours were merely the foundation for a secure future, a better life for us. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. Until the day he simply didn't come home. At first, I assumed it was another trip he'd forgotten to mention, another detail lost in his overwhelming schedule. Then his phone went straight to voicemail, day after day. For 3 agonizing days, I told Finn, "Daddy's busy, honey. He'll be home soon," even as dread curled in my stomach like a suffocating fist. On the 4th agonizing day, the call finally came. Not from Julian, but from a somber voice, delivering news that sliced through the quiet like a jagged blade. An accident. A snowmobile, they said, gone through thin ice on a remote river in Idaho. Swept away by a current so fierce, so unforgiving, that no body could be recovered. I remember clutching that phone, hearing the impossible words, and feeling my knees give out. My little boy looked up at me with wide, bewildered brown eyes as I sank to the kitchen floor, the phone still pressed to my ear. My mind raced through all the missed birthdays, the silent dinners, the lonely nights, and I hated myself for still loving him even then. They issued a death certificate a week later, a neatly printed piece of paper, legally binding, sealing my life into a chapter one hadn't agreed to end. I buried an empty urn, a vessel for what was lost but never found, a hollow symbol of a life abruptly cut short. There was no body, no final embrace, no true closure, only an echoing silence that settled over our lives, thick and suffocating. And in that silence, I built walls around my heart so high that even Finn noticed. "Mommy, why don't you smile anymore?" he asked one night. I smiled anyway, a fragile, brittle thing, because what else could I do? For 3 long years, I convinced myself I was healing, that I was strong. But grief has a way of clinging, like glue to the soul. You can scrub and scrape, but it clings, leaving an indelible mark. That's why this trip to the Azure Coast wasn't merely about beaches and sunshine. It was about breathing again, truly breathing, even if just for a week. I had no idea then how quickly those walls I'd so carefully built were about to crack. Part 3. A Ghost in the Crowd. 3 years had passed, and 3 years has a peculiar way of changing everything and nothing at all. I learned to wake up without the expectant sound of Julian's voice in the kitchen. I learned to pay bills, to fix leaky faucets, to show up at every one of Finn's soccer games without another parent standing beside me in the stands, just for us. I became the woman who smiled politely when people offered condolences, who waved off concerned questions from coworkers, who convinced herself she was fine, even when she felt 1,000 miles from it. Our life in the mountain city grew quieter in those 3 years. Our friends slowly stopped calling, not out of cruelty, simply because life, for them, moved on. Mine felt frozen, like winter refusing to thaw. I poured myself into my work at the bank, meticulously built a routine that left little room for intrusive feelings, and clung to Finn like a precious lifeline. He became my singular reason for everything. If I felt too tired to get out of bed, I reminded myself he needs breakfast. He needs school. He needs you to be strong. Finn grew fast, far too fast. One day I was patiently teaching him how to tie his shoelaces, and the next he was earnestly telling me which superhero movies I just had to see. And lately, the questions about his dad had begun to surface again. Quiet ones, whispered at bedtime when he thought I couldn't hear the sadness underneath his young voice. "Mom, do you think Daddy can see me? Or, when I grow up, will I remember what he looked like?" I answered as best I could, but every response felt like I was subtly erasing Julian more, replacing him with vague memories and half-truths about a man who worked a lot but loved you very much. The truth was, I hadn't processed any of it. I'd placed my grief on a shelf, like an old, forgotten book I didn't dare open. But there are only so many times you can walk past that shelf before the sheer weight of what's unaddressed begins to crack it. One evening, after tucking Finn into bed, I found myself aimlessly scrolling through vacation packages online. I hadn't been anywhere in years, not since before Julian's death. At first, it felt wrong, almost like a betrayal of something sacred, of the very fabric of our loss. But then I looked at Finn's closed bedroom door, listened to the gentle rhythm of his breath, and a new thought bloomed. He deserves happy memories, too. That's how I ended up with 2 tickets to the Azure Coast, 1 hotel room near the crashing waves, and a week meticulously blocked off on my work calendar. It felt reckless, like jumping headfirst into a freezing lake, but also strangely, exhilaratingly freeing. This wasn't just about sunshine and ocean views. It was about telling myself, unequivocally, that I was still allowed to live. When I finally told Finn, his eyes went wide, his mouth falling open as if he'd just been granted a superpower. The beach? For real, he shouted, bouncing on the couch with unrestrained joy. He wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe, his whisper muffled against my ear. "You're going to smile more there, right, Mom?" That simple, hopeful question lodged in my chest like a pebble I couldn't swallow. I kissed the top of his head and promised, "I'll try, honey. I'll really try." That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights of the mountain city, thinking about how profoundly different my life had become. I used to dream about exotic vacations with Julian, clinking champagne glasses on some European balcony. Now, merely booking a simple trip to the California coast felt like scaling Everest. But as I meticulously packed Finn's favorite swim trunks and a tube of sunscreen, a thought surfaced, one I hadn't truly felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, this is the start of something better. I had no idea then how right and how terribly wrong that thought would ultimately be. Part 4. The Unthinkable Sighting. The morning of our flight, Finn was a whirlwind of pure, unadulterated excitement, bouncing through the house as if it were Christmas morning. He dragged his small rolling suitcase behind him, its wheels clattering a lively rhythm on the hardwood floors, as he shouted, "Azure Coast, here we come." His joy was utterly contagious. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt that elusive flutter of excitement, a feeling I thought I'd buried forever with Julian's death certificate. The airport, predictably, was its usual symphony of controlled chaos, people rushing past with steaming coffee cups, security lines snaking endlessly, the dull hum of tired travelers navigating their connections. Finn held my hand the entire time, his tiny fingers gripping mine with a mixture of bubbling excitement and a sweet nervousness. We boarded our flight, and as we found our seats, he pressed his face to the window, his breath misting the glass, and whispered, "We're really going, Mom. We're really doing this." The flight was full, yet calm. Passengers settled in, pulling out headphones, engrossing books, or plush neck pillows. I tried to relax, repeatedly telling myself this trip was about shedding the burden of the past, about forging bright, new memories. But then I noticed Finn, his gaze fixed down the aisle, a puzzled frown slowly knitting his young brow. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at my sleeve, his voice barely audible. Is that Dad?" My breath hitched. My heart, which had just moments ago beat with renewed hope, now plunged into a freezing dread. I turned my head, agonizingly slowly, afraid of what unspeakable vision might greet my eyes. A man, perhaps 2 rows ahead, sat sideways in his seat, deep in conversation with a young, blonde woman beside him. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face, obscuring his features, and a pair of dark sunglasses. Yet, something about the precise slope of his shoulders, the distinctive way his hands articulated his words as he spoke, even the tilt of his head, it was agonizingly, utterly familiar. I forced a shaky, hollow laugh. "Sweetheart, no. You must be thinking of someone else. People look alike, you know." But then he shifted just slightly, turning his head, and my stomach turned to solid ice. There it was, that faint, almost invisible scar just beneath his jawline, a mark only discernible if you knew precisely where to look, a mark I had traced with my fingers and kissed 100 times in a lifetime that now felt like a forgotten dream. Finn whispered again, "Mom, I'm serious." "That's Dad." I couldn't breathe. For 3 long years, I had told myself Julian was gone, that I had meticulously buried every shred of hope, every lingering thread of him. And yet, here I was, on a random flight to the Azure Coast, staring at a man who looked exactly like my dead husband, alive and laughing with another woman. My hand instinctively tightened around Finn's. "It's probably just someone who looks like him, honey," I managed, though my voice trembled, betraying the desperate lie. I turned back to the window, willing my racing pulse to slow, but every nerve in my body screamed to look again. As the plane finally lifted off, its engines roaring to life, I kept stealing furtive glances, memorizing every minute detail, the way he leaned in to listen intently to the woman beside him, the casual, almost rhythmic tap of his fingers on the armrest. Exactly how Julian used to when he was deep in thought. I told myself it wasn't possible. That grief, combined with exhaustion, was playing cruel tricks on me. But deep down, a persistent whisper echoed in my mind. What if it really is him? For the remainder of the flight, I sat frozen, my thoughts spiraling wildly between profound shock, bitter anger, and something far more dangerous, a flicker of raw, forbidden hope. When the wheels touched down on solid ground, and the usual bustle of passengers began gathering their bags, I made a choice that surprised even myself. I stayed seated, clutching Finn's backpack tightly to my chest, waiting for that man to leave first, desperate not to see his face again. Or perhaps because I was too terrified of seeing it clearly, undeniably. But Finn wasn't done. He turned to me, his wide eyes shining with conviction, and simply said, "Mom." He looked right at me. He smiled. And just like that, my entire world tilted, shattering into a million pieces. Part 5, A New Shadow. The Azure Coast greeted us with a cascade of warm sunlight and the invigorating smell of salt in the air, a welcome balm after the mountain city's dry chill. Finn was still buzzing from the flight, chattering excitedly about how the ocean looked from the window, how enormous the waves must be, and his grand plans to build the biggest sandcastle California had ever seen. I managed a weak smile, trying desperately to stay present, but my mind remained inextricably stuck on that man from the plane. It had to be coincidence, I told myself again and again, with every ragged breath. People look alike all the time, their features sometimes mirroring strangers. But that scar, that posture, even the precise way his hand rested on the seaback, it was all too familiar, too deeply ingrained in my memory. And Finn, children don't imagine things like that, not with that startling level of certainty. By the time we checked into the hotel, I had almost convinced myself to let it go. This trip was supposed to be about healing, about building something new, not about digging up the haunting specters of the past. We had a balcony room overlooking the vast, shimmering ocean. When Finn saw it, he gasped as though someone had handed him a pirate's treasure chest. He spent the entire evening flitting between the window and the television, chattering incessantly about seashells and playful dolphins. For a few precious hours, I felt a semblance of normal again, the tension in my shoulders easing. That night, after Finn had finally drifted off to sleep, his breathing soft and even, I stepped onto the balcony, breathing deeply of the cool ocean breeze. It was quiet, beautifully peaceful, until I caught the faint murmur of voices from the balcony directly below. At first, it was nothing more than the indistinct drone of an argument, the typical squabble of a couple on vacation. But then, a single phrase pierced the calm, cutting through the general hum of the evening, and I froze, my body rigid. That voice, that precise cadence. "Do you ever care about anything besides money?" A man's voice snapped, laced with a familiar, bitter frustration. My stomach plummeted, a cold, heavy stone. My hands clenched the railing so tightly my knuckles turned white, stretched taut beneath the skin. That voice, I would have recognized it anywhere, in any life, at any distance. I didn't even need to hear every word. The rhythm, The exact way he emphasized his syllables when he was angry was burned into my memory. Then a woman, her voice young and sharp, judging by the tone, shot back, "Don't start with me, Julian. I told you what I wanted from the beginning." Julian. The name resonated through my very bones, vibrating in the humid air. My knees gave out and I stumbled, forcing myself to lean against the cold metal of the balcony door for support. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. I crouched slightly, just enough to peer down without being obvious. And there he was. Same broad shoulders, same familiar way he gestured with his hands when he talked, now dressed in a simple t-shirt and shorts. The wide-brimmed hat and dark sunglasses were gone, stripped away by the privacy of the evening. There was no mistaking him now. Julian Vance, my dead husband, was standing a single floor below me, very much alive, and openly arguing with another woman. My first, visceral instinct was to storm down there, to pound on their door, to demand answers, to scream all the questions that had been buried alive for 3 agonizing years. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, heavy and unwilling to move. Instead, I stood there, shaking, listening to the bitter snippets of their fight. "You think dragging me to some cheap hotel in the Azure Coast makes up for everything?" she yelled. "It's a 4-star hotel, Serena," he snapped back. Serena. So that was her name. I recoiled, pressing a hand over my mouth, a choked gasp escaping my lips. My heart felt as though it might break all over again. Not from the original loss, not from missing him, but from the searing pain of finding him alive, smiling at another woman, living a life I wasn't even allowed to know existed. When I finally stumbled back inside, Finn stirred in his sleep and mumbled, "Mom." I knelt next to him, brushing the soft hair from his forehead. "Sure, it's okay, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." He sighed, rolled over, and settled, completely unaware that his entire world had just subtly, irrevocably shifted. Mine had too. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the dimly lit floor, one terrifying thought running like wildfire through my mind. He's alive. Julian is alive. And I had absolutely no idea what to do with that truth. Part 6, An Unexpected Confrontation. The next morning, I woke with a faint, foolish hope that it had all been some cruel, elaborate dream. But one glance at the balcony below, at the empty space where he'd stood, reminded me, with brutal clarity, that it hadn't been. Julian Vance, my dead husband, was alive, breathing the same coastal air and staying 1 floor below me with a woman named Serena. I moved through the day on autopilot, forcing cheerful smiles for Finn as we explored the vibrant beach. But my chest felt tight, constricted, as though every breath was borrowed, fragile. I told myself I'd focus solely on Finn, on the simple joys of the day, and somehow let the rest go. But when night fell and Finn drifted into the peaceful realm of sleep, curiosity and a simmering anger got the better of me. I slipped on my widest sunglasses, a futile attempt at disguise in the evening dimness, tied my hair back into a severe ponytail, and walked purposefully down to the hotel bar. The place was quieter than the night before, lit with soft amber lamps, the gentle hum of a small jazz trio providing a low, melodic backdrop. And there he was, just as I'd seen him on the plane and below. Sitting alone at the bar, a single drink in hand. He looked more worn, perhaps a little older, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth, yet still unmistakably Julian. My Julian. He didn't see me. He was too consumed, staring intently at the amber liquid in his glass, as if it held all the elusive answers he'd been chasing. My legs moved before my mind could fully register the intention. I slid onto a bar stool 2 seats away, trying to keep my voice low and casual, a practiced stranger's tone. "Rough night." He looked up, startled, his eyes momentarily widening behind his own dark-rimmed glasses, before a weary, half-smile touched his lips. You could say that. His voice. God, that voice. It rolled over me like a slow, heavy wave, awakening dormant memories. "Want to talk about it?" I asked, forcing my tone to sound like I was merely making polite small talk with a fellow traveler. Julian shrugged, a gesture I knew intimately. "Girlfriend drama. You know how it is." I pretended to chuckle, a hollow, bitter sound, even as my stomach churned, a volatile mixture of disbelief and rage. Girlfriend drama. This man had faked his own death, abandoned his wife and young child, only to be here, arguing about hotel quality with someone new. She doesn't get me, he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, oblivious to the volcano erupting within me. Thinks I'm some boring old guy trying to play young again. Maybe she's right. He glanced at me then, his eyes searching, a flicker of recognition in their depths, as if he were trying to place me. I held my breath, gripping my own glass, and looked down at my drink, hoping the dim light and my disguise held. What do you want her to see? I asked quietly, my voice a carefully modulated whisper. He chuckled then, a bitter, self-deprecating sound. That I'm not just some guy with money. That I've been through hell and back. That I'm trying to do better. He paused, then shook his head, running a hand over his tired face. Forget it. You don't want to hear my sob story. I'm a good listener, I said softly, the words feeling alien on my tongue. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate bird in a cage. Hell and back, he said. He had no idea what hell truly was. He sighed, rubbing his forehead as if trying to erase the very thoughts there. 3 years ago, I lost everything. Thought I was done for. Had to start over from scratch. Leave people behind. He looked out into the dimly lit room, his gaze distant. I didn't want to leave, but you can't explain that to everyone. Sometimes you just disappear. I gripped my glass so hard I thought it might shatter in my hand. Disappear. That's what he called it. Abandoning us. Vanishing from our lives. I wanted to scream, to reveal who I was, to drag him upstairs and show him his son, sleeping in blissful ignorance, his world fractured by this very man. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding, playing the part of a compassionate stranger, while my entire world tilted, utterly off its axis. Julian finished his drink, the ice clinking, and pushed himself off the stool, giving me a polite, weary nod. Thanks for listening. You're easier to talk to than most people I know. I managed a tight, almost imperceptible smile. Anytime. And then he walked away, leaving me staring at the polished bar top, shaking with a tumultuous mix of searing fury and something I hated to admit, a strange, unsettling relief. Relief because the voice, the face, the man, they were real. He was alive. But now I had to confront a terrifying new question. What now was I going to do about it? Part 7, A Reckoning on the Sand. The following afternoon should have been perfect. The sun was warm, not blistering, casting a golden hue over everything. The breeze carried that distinctive salty smell that always made me feel like life, despite everything, truly could start anew. And Finn was happily building what he proudly declared the strongest sandcastle in California. I sat on a striped towel nearby, watching him dig and shape his majestic towers, sipping from a cool bottle of water. For the first time in days, I almost forgot about Julian. Almost. Then I heard a woman's frantic shouting. My head snapped up instinctively, scanning the crowded beach until my eyes landed on her. Serena, the young woman from the balcony. She was kneeling frantically beside someone sprawled motionlessly in the sand. My heart instantly froze in my chest. It was him. Julian was lying on his side, his face pale and unnaturally still, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath him. Serena was frantic, repeatedly shouting his name, shaking his shoulder with desperate urgency, but he remained unresponsive. For one split second, a dark, primal thought crossed my mind. I considered staying exactly where I was, remaining a detached observer. After all, he wasn't my problem anymore. He had made that abundantly clear. But then I saw Finn, wide-eyed, watching the scene unfold, gripping his sand shovel like a precious lifeline, his small brow furrowed in a confusion that mirrored my own. "Mom," he whispered, his voice tinged with alarm, "is that?" I didn't let him finish. "Stay here, sweetheart." I called out, already running, my bare feet sinking into the warm sand with each pounding stride. When I reached Julian, his breathing was shallow, a barely discernible whisper of air, but his pulse was faint, yet unmistakably present. Years ago, I'd taken a CPR course for work. Now, muscle memory, honed by crisis, kicked in. I carefully rolled him onto his back, tilting his head gently to clear his airway. "He's breathing," I stated, more to myself than to Serena, who was still sobbing beside him, paralyzed by panic. Probably heat stroke or dehydration. I quickly shaded his face with my towel and barked, "Go get someone from the hotel or call 911. Serena nodded, finally jolted into action, and sprinted off toward the resort buildings. It was utterly surreal. Kneeling there on the warm sand, holding the wrist of the man who had faked his own death and shattered my entire life. A part of me, a small, vindictive part, wanted to simply let go, to stand up and walk away. But I didn't. Because even after everything, even after all the pain and the betrayal, there was still this profound, innate reflex inside me, an unbreakable instinct to save him. Julian stirred, his eyelids fluttering. He groaned, a low, disoriented sound. "Alara." I froze. He had recognized me. The disguise had failed. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's me." His eyes opened fully, a profound confusion flooding his face as his gaze sharpened and focused on mine. You're really here." "Alive," I replied, my voice trembling now, with a sharp edge of bitterness I hadn't planned. "Just like you." Serena returned with a hotel staff member who was carrying a first aid kit. He knelt beside us, calmly checking Julian's vitals while I stepped back, wiping my sandy hands on my shorts. My pulse was still racing, not from the exertion of running, but from the raw shock of this impossible reunion. The staff member helped Julian sit up, offering him water and clear instructions to rest in the shade. Serena hovered protectively, glaring at me as if I were some trespassing stranger, which, in her world, I suppose I was. Julian's gaze, however, remained locked on me, intense and pleading. "Alara, please. We need to talk." I stood, brushing the clinging sand from my legs, my expression neutral, unreadable. "Not here. Tonight. 10 o'clock, the hotel bar." He nodded, still looking shaken, not just from the collapse, but from the sheer impossible reality of seeing me, very much alive and standing right in front of him, after 3 years of believing he'd successfully erased me from his life. I walked back to Finn, who had abandoned his majestic sandcastle and was now staring at us with a deep frown. "Mom, is that really Dad?" he whispered, his young voice thick with bewilderment. I crouched down, pulling him into a tight hug, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of him. "We'll talk about it, sweetheart," I murmured against his hair, "but for now, let's just head back inside." As we walked toward the hotel, my mind reeled, a whirlwind of tumultuous thoughts. Tonight, I would finally hear the truth, the whole truth, and I wasn't sure which terrified me more, that he had a plausible, understandable reason for what he did, or that he didn't. Part 8, The Truth and Its Aftermath. The hotel bar was quieter than the night before, just a handful of guests scattered around, sipping cocktails and scrolling through their phones. I arrived early, needing a moment to settle the fierce turbulence within me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, so I wrapped them tightly around a chilled glass of water and tried to force calm breaths into my lungs. At precisely 10 o'clock, Julian walked in. No hat, no sunglasses, no way to hide. He looked older, lines of worry and experience etched around his mouth and eyes, a hint of gray subtly streaking his dark hair, but still undeniably Julian Vance. My husband. My dead husband. He approached cautiously, his movements hesitant, as if I might bolt or, perhaps, slap him across the face. Honestly, I hadn't entirely ruled out either possibility myself. "Alara," he said softly, almost like a prayer, the sound of my name on his lips feeling both foreign and agonizingly familiar. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, my gaze unwavering, waiting. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady. "You have 2 minutes, Julian. 2 minutes to tell me why I buried an empty urn and spent 3 years raising your son alone." He winced, rubbing his hands together, a nervous, almost frantic gesture, like a man trying to scrub off something that wouldn't ever come clean. I didn't mean for it to be like that, he began, his voice hoarse. I had to disappear, Alara. I truly had no choice. No choice. I repeated, a bitter, disbelieving laugh escaping me. You had no choice but to fake your own death? To let me tell a 5-year-old boy that his father was gone forever, swallowed by ice? My voice cracked despite my best efforts to keep it steady, composed. Make me understand that, Julian. Make me understand why I've been grieving someone who was alive this whole time. Breathing. Living. He swallowed hard, his eyes flickering away, unable to hold my piercing gaze. I was in trouble. Bad trouble. You remember that startup investment I was working on? He asked, his voice a low confession. It wasn't just a business deal, Alara. I borrowed money from the wrong people. People who don't forgive mistakes. When the deal went south, they threatened me. And then, they threatened you. Both of you. I stared at him, utterly numb, unsure if I wanted to laugh hysterically or collapse into heartbroken sobs. So instead of coming to me, instead of facing the problem together, you staged an accident and disappeared. You let me think you were dead because it was easier than telling me the truth. It wasn't easier, he said quickly, his voice rising in desperation. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I thought if I stayed, you and Finn would be in mortal danger. So I left. I cut all ties, changed my name, paid back every single cent I owed, little by little, clawing my way out. I've spent the last 3 years trying to build a life where no one could hurt me or you again. My eyes burned, tears threatening to spill over, but I stubbornly refused to let them fall. And Serena, I asked, my voice laced with icy sarcasm, is she part of this safe, new life too? He flinched, then nodded reluctantly, his gaze falling to the floor. I met her after. She doesn't know anything about my past. About you. About Finn. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest, a shield. You let me grieve you for 3 years, Julian. You let Finn grow up thinking his dad was gone forever, mourned, when all the while, you were sipping cocktails by the ocean with someone else. Do you even begin to understand what that did to us? What it did to me? He looked down, deep shame radiating off him like oppressive heat. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I had to see you. I had to see Finn. I had to know if there was even a chance to make things right. The tears came then, but not for him. Not for his perceived pain. They came for me. For the lonely years I spent clawing my way out of the suffocating abyss of grief, while he hid behind a new name and a new relationship. You don't get to decide when to come back, Julian, I said quietly, the words firm, resolute. You don't get to just walk in here and act like we can pick up where we left off, as if nothing happened. Julian reached out, his hand hovering over mine, but I instinctively pulled back, flinching away from his touch. Alara, please. Let me be a father again. Let me explain to Finn. I'm begging you. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly, the scrape of metal on tile a sharp sound in the quiet bar. Tomorrow, 11 a.m., at the hotel cafe. You can see him. But after that, I paused, meeting his pleading gaze head-on. We'll see where this goes. And then I walked out, my legs trembling, but my spine straight, unyielding. I finally had the truth. But it didn't feel like closure. It felt like the ominous beginning of another storm, one I wasn't sure I had the strength to weather. Part 9. Rebuilding a Fractured World. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. I wondered if I'd made a colossal mistake agreeing to this, letting Julian see Finn. It felt like opening a door I had meticulously welded shut 3 years ago, a protective barrier for my son's fragile heart. What if it hurt Finn more than it helped? What if it reopened wounds we had finally, painstakingly learned to live with, wounds that had begun to scar over? Finn, however, woke up oblivious to my inner turmoil, thrilled at the prospect of a hotel breakfast. Do they have pancakes, Mom? Please say they have pancakes, he chirped, tugging enthusiastically on his sneakers. I forced a smile, a practiced mask. They have pancakes, sweetheart. Don't worry. By the time we reached the hotel cafe, Julian was already there, sitting at a corner table, nervously tapping his fingers against the pristine white tablecloth. When Finn saw him, he froze, his young face scrunched up, trying to solve a puzzle too immense for his years. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thin, hesitant. "That's him. That's really him, isn't it?" I nodded slowly, my throat tight. "Yes, honey, that's your dad." Finn didn't run to him, not like in the movies, not with the unrestrained joy of a reunion. He walked carefully, deliberately, his eyes locked on Julian's, and stopped across the table, simply staring. Julian's eyes glistened, shimmering with unshed tears, as he knelt to meet his son at eye level. "Hi, buddy," he said softly, his voice breaking, raw with emotion. "It's me. It's Dad." Finn's lip trembled. "But you were gone. Mom said you." He stopped, choking on the words, unable to finish. Julian's face crumpled, reflecting every ounce of his regret. "I know, Finn. I know. And I am so sorry. I made a colossal mistake. I genuinely thought I was protecting you and your mother, but instead, I only brought you pain." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a slow, almost reverent motion, Finn stepped forward. His small arms wrapped tightly around Julian's neck, clinging to him like a lifeline. Julian held him just as fiercely, as if he might never let go, his broad shoulders shaking with silent emotion. I looked away, blinking hard, because whatever my feelings for Julian were, however complex and contradictory, Finn had just gotten a piece of his fractured heart back. They eventually sat down, and Julian ordered a towering stack of pancakes and orange juice for Finn and black coffee for himself. The conversation was awkward at first, a halting dance. Finn, with the innocent bluntness only a child possesses, asked about where Julian had been, what he'd been doing. Julian gave vague but surprisingly honest answers about traveling for work and fixing some big problems. I let him handle it, resisting the fierce urge to correct or add any damning details. At one point, Finn leaned in, his voice a quiet whisper. "Did you miss me?" Julian swallowed hard, his gaze softening. "More than anything in this world, Finn. More than anything." That was all it took. Finn smiled, small at first, then wide and radiant, and began chattering animatedly about school, his soccer team, and the magnificent sandcastle he'd built yesterday. Julian listened intently, as if every word Finn uttered was pure gold, nodding, laughing at the right moments, his eyes drinking in every expression on our son's face. When breakfast ended, Finn tugged playfully on Julian's hand. "Can you come to the beach with us today, please?" Julian looked at me, silently, asking permission. I hesitated, a whirlwind of doubt in my mind, but finally I nodded. For a little while, the three of us walked down to the water, and for a precious hour, it almost felt normal. Julian and Finn built sandcastles together, just as I had dreamed they would years ago, laughing easily when the mischievous tide claimed one of their towers. I watched them, my heart torn in two directions, profoundly grateful that Finn was having this moment, yet painfully aware of all the precious moments we had lost, irrevocably. When it was finally time to leave, Finn hugged Julian again, clinging tight, and said, "Can we see you tomorrow, too?" Julian glanced at me, his eyes seeking my reaction. "We'll see, buddy," he said softly. "One step at a time." On the way back to the hotel, Finn's voice was bright, excited, brimming with renewed hope. "Mom, maybe he can come home with us. Maybe we can be like before." I didn't answer right away, because I truly didn't know the answer. The door I had welded shut was wide open now, and what came through it might change everything for better or for worse. Part 10. Uncharted Waters. That evening, after Finn had finally fallen asleep, I sat alone on the balcony, staring out at the vast, dark ocean. Waves rolled in, steady and calm, so unlike the tumultuous storm inside my chest. Seeing Julian with Finn had been healing in a way I hadn't expected, a balm to a wound I thought would never mend. But it had also brought back a raw, aching vulnerability I'd worked so fiercely to bury. There was a soft knock on the balcony door. I knew it was him. I let Julian step out, his eyes cautious, unsure how close he was allowed to stand. "He's amazing," Julian said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You did such a good job with him, Alara." I crossed my arms, the gesture of physical barrier. I didn't have a choice. You were gone. He nodded, guilt etched deep on his face, lines of sorrow radiating from his eyes. I know, and I'm sorry. I can't take back what I did, but I want to be in his life now. Even if you never forgive me, please don't shut me out from him. I studied him, searching for any flicker of the man I used to love, the man I married, not the one who ran away and let us grieve him for 3 years. You don't get to walk back into our lives and act like we can simply pick up where we left off, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. You faked your death, Julian. You left me to explain to our son why his father was gone forever. You don't just erase that because you feel guilty now. He lowered his head, acknowledging the profound truth of my words. I'm not asking you to take me back. I know I lost that right, but I am asking for a chance to be his dad again. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll move slowly. I'll respect your boundaries. Just please, Alara, don't keep me out of his life. For a long moment, all I could hear was the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. A fierce part of me wanted to tell him to disappear again, permanently, to never come back. But I couldn't ignore the luminous look on Finn's face when he'd hugged his dad that morning, or the uninhibited way he'd laughed on the beach, a sound I hadn't truly heard in years. You can be in his life, I said finally, the words a steady stream of resolution. But it will be on my terms, Julian. You'll call before you visit. No more surprise drop-ins, no more vanishing acts. And if you ever lie to him again, about anything I emphasized, my voice hardening, we are done. Permanently. Relief, profound and palpable, washed over Julian's face. Thank you. I promise, Alara, I won't screw this up again. I turned back to the vast, indifferent ocean, my voice steady now, infused with a newfound strength. Good, because I'm not the same woman you left behind. I built a life without you, and I'm proud of it. I don't need you, Julian. Finn doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be honest. Julian nodded, blinking quickly, his eyes glistening once more. You're stronger than I remember. I had to be, I said softly, the words hanging in the night air. You made sure of that. He left quietly after that, and I stayed on the balcony, letting the salty breeze cool my face, drying the tears I didn't even realize had fallen. This wasn't the storybook reunion Finn might have dreamed of, not the fairy tale ending a child longs for. But it was honest. And honesty, I realized, was something I could finally build upon. Even if it was just Finn and I, moving forward, with Julian playing a small, carefully monitored role in our lives, it was a beginning. A real one. When I finally went to bed, Finn stirred and murmured in his sleep, "Mom, we're happy, right?" I brushed the soft hair from his forehead and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. We're happy and we're going to be okay." And for the first time in 3 long, desolate years, I finally, truly believed. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If Alara's story resonated with you, please consider leaving a comment below, liking this video, and subscribing to our channel, Echo Tales, for more journeys into the depths of human experience. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes.